Is that Eikenberry and Holbrook's fault?
Yes, and it was also Karzai's own fault for doing the massive fraud and then getting angry when he got caught out. So I mean, I think it was a accumulation of that big mess. But yes, but what he does feel is that he felt betrayed. He felt that the Americans wanted him out. I think
and he had a good reason to think of.
It seems that it seems that Holbrook thought Ashraf Ghani could win, which I never thought. And Eikenberry did start, entertaining the opposition, and so Karzai just saw that as absolute betrayal. And then he was, humiliated to admit that he hadn't won the election and go to a second round. And that, when I saw his face that day, I thought, ooh, he's never going to forgive anyone who's put him through this, because that was humiliation, and Afghans don't take that lightly. So I felt, the West handled him incredibly badly. I see all his warts as well, but I do think he's been made a scapegoat these last
25 years from now, will he be seen as sort of the Afghan Lincoln, or will he be seen as the Afghan Nixon, or what will he be seen as?
I don't think he's great, but when you ask Afghans, the Karzai years are going to be seen as this great moment of potential.
In fact, polling shows that he's consistently popular. We've had multiple years of polling. He always does 60%, I think, is usually the average.
Yeah, and Pashtuns particularly, are upset with him and weary of him and blame him for, this whole insurgency, or for not. But given, if he was running, they would still vote for him. I mean, they will. So, they might criticize him, but still they would vote for him over.
Could he run again for a third term, which is not associated with his 2 terms?
Some say he's got that in mind. That he wants
and constitutionally, it would be possible. He could come back for a third term, say in 10 years. I mean, he'll only be 66.
I'm not sure. I thought it was just 2 terms, but some people say that that's what he's got in mind. He wants to do a Medvedev-Putin changeover.
Yeah.
So
but
we'll
he
see.
didn't endorse any candidates.
No.
And his preferred candidate is doing terribly.
Yeah, but some people say he's been supporting both Ashraf Ghani and Zalmay Rasul, so he's kept a foot in both camps.
Okay.
In fact, he's cleverer than that. I think he's got relations with all the candidates. Yeah.
Except Abdullah and he are not buddies.
No, but I think there's been a bit of a reaching out case,
Okay, well, it seems there's
Yeah.
quite a lot of reaching out will need to be done for that one to work. So turning to bin Laden.
Yeah.
So I guess, there are 3 levels of assertions in the book. Let's start with the ones that seem the most reasonable from my point of view. The correspondence with Mullah Omar and the leader of LET. Now, you can sort of, that seems entirely plausible. Those documents have not come out publicly, but there's certainly been discussion of those kind of communications.
Yeah, I mean, people who've seen them talk about it.
Yeah. So bin Laden was corresponding with a lot of people while he was in Abbottabad, as you know, including with senior members of Al-Qaeda. And there was a courier system with cutouts. One of the reasons, as you know, it took so long to find him. It took the United States arguably $500 billion in terms of our efforts on the intelligence side after 9/11 to, even though we really wanted to find him, to kind of get into this courier system and understand it. So this courier system was pretty good. So you can imagine letters going to not only, and I think people within Al-Qaeda didn't know where bin Laden was living. They didn't need to know.
Right.
So I think you could say this correspondence is interesting, but it certainly doesn't prove the case, because there would have been courier cutouts all along the way between the recipients of these letters and bin Laden. The second level is a Pakistani government official who, talking to a U.S. government official, who told him that Pasha, there was a conversation that you say might indicate, which is both hearsay and interpretive, right? And the third level is the desk, the Osama bin Laden desk. Well, now that seems like something that's real, that either exists or it doesn't exist. And I guess the question is why, well, first, I mean, do we know the name of the person who ran this desk? Do we have any more information about this desk? Is there anything that you can say about it?
I'm afraid I can't say anything more. It's carefully worded in the book. And
was it called the Osama bin Laden desk? What was it called? Who was the...
I know a bit more, but I'm afraid I can't tell you, because, and this is very important that people know, it's extremely dangerous for the person who gave this detail, as you can imagine. There's going to be a witch hunt already, and I was led to this person by someone else who's a journalist, And it's extremely dangerous for that Pakistani journalist. I have in my prologue a quick wrap-up of how dangerous it is for Pakistani journalists. 42, I think, have been killed in the last 10 years in the course of their work. And some, as we know, Salim Shahzad, people were actually, detained by the ISI and killed. There's a lot of Baluch journalists who've ended up dumped on, killed and dumped on the roadsides. So it's dangerous for the people who helped me get that, and I don't want to say anything more.
Sure, no, understood.
And in fact, there is a restriction on names because of that, because of what consequences could be brought.
Okay, it's a huge scoop if true, and we have some of the most aggressive journalists in the world, both in Pakistan and the United States. And I guess, the part of me that is quite skeptical about this is, why hasn't anybody else followed up in any meaningful way on this now that you've put it out there? Because typically when there's a big news story, people glom on.
Right.
And secondly, why hasn't the newspaper, your newspaper, put it in the newspaper rather than the magazine, which is a sort of separate entity?
Good question. I never offered it to them, I have to say. Yeah, I don't know if we've even talked about that. Now, I will say, though, that when the book came out, or the magazine piece, I forewarned the people who work for the New York Times in Pakistan. You probably know that Declan Walsh, our New York Times Western expatriate correspondent, is banned at the moment from Pakistan. He's living in London. And he's actually on book leave anyway, so he's not actually currently writing. But I think our reporters, our local reporters, had to really lie low because of the fear of any backlash. They didn't actually work with me on the book, but we were very worried about their safety. So I don't know. I haven't talked to the editors as why they didn't follow up on it or write about it. But it is difficult. I mean, I'll admit, I could not get a second source to confirm this. I tried it out on US officials who said you can go with that, you can be confident you're on the right track, but they couldn't confirm it. So yes, some stories you only get a one source, and perhaps we won't for some years. I believe it'll come out eventually, but it's a very difficult one, because essentially if for a Pakistani to confirm it, they're committing treason in the Pakistani military's eyes. So you're asking someone to really go against his own country. That's how they view it.
Well, let me add some other notes of skepticism. As you know, I wrote a book about bin Laden and the hunt for bin Laden. And I've discovered that there was one of the wives who was living on a compound didn't know that Osama bin Laden was living in the compound. I mean, bin Laden was hiding from people on the compound. Now, we had satellite coverage over that compound from August of 2010 to May 2011, right? We know that he never left, forget about leaving the compound, he never left the second or the third floor, right? So he wasn't going anywhere to meet with people, and no one was coming to meet with him. So that kind of gives me pause if there was sort of a controller or somebody that he was in touch with in the Pakistani side. The other question that you have to always ask is who benefits, cui bono, right? So on the Pakistani side, as we discussed before we had a private discussion, Musharraf is lucky to be alive after those two very serious assassination attempts in 2003. The person who investigated those attempts was who?
Kiani.
General Kiani. So he was in charge of the very serious investigation of the Musharraf assassination attempts, which were carried out by Al-Qaeda. Abu Faraj al-Libi, who was the guy responsible, who was in touch with bin Laden, is now in US custody as a result of that investigation. So the question is, Kiani's Pasha's boss, why would he countenance a bin Laden desk when he went to great efforts to break up this Al-Qaeda ring that had tried to kill his boss, General Musharraf? And it's kind of like puzzling. Why would what's the point? And again, then on the US side, there are a large number of people in the US government who have very dim views of Pakistan, and the US government is not a unitary, there's the CIA has one view, CENTCOM has another view, NSC might have another view. So, and it's a very large group of people, and lots of people who would be willing, if there was a real smoking gun, to let it out. And I guess my question is, if it exists and we have these thousands of pages of documents, bin Laden had no idea he'd ever be found, right? So these documents are pretty effective. I mean, they're sort of Bin Laden unplugged, right?
Right.
And so if he had a Bin Laden desk, wouldn't he have communication with them in some shape or form?
Yeah, but I think it wouldn't have been written. I think it would have been.
Well, we've established that nobody's visiting the compound. He's not leaving for at least a year that we know of, and that's when we had satellite coverage over it.
Right, but I think people could visit, couldn't they?
No one visited the compound. In fact, people were.
And you see, neighbours saw the women go out.
Well,
to the hospital and stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the women. There were 24 people living on the compound.
Right.
Right. And
so the courier and the brother and their wives
yes.
came and went.
They
and
came.
Some of the Arab women went to the hospital. We know that as well.
Very occasionally.
I don't know if it was in the last.
Well, okay, so people might have visited the compound disguised as women, you were saying?
Yeah, well, sometimes they saw, they knew there was an auntie, but we know he had 3 wives there, so it could have been the 3 wives. But there were the 2 Pakistani women and an auntie in full black burqa who was seen going to the hospital. And his Yemeni wife gave birth in the hospital. So the women were going out to see doctors or whatever. But you make some very good points, but let me show that for each point there's another point. So he didn't travel, but then we have this recorded intelligence briefing of 2009 where Bin Laden met with Saifullah Akhtar in Kohat in 2009. And now that was in the Daily Times before the raid. I tracked it down after the raid, but it was an anonymously written report. I found the reporter. I found the person who leaked it, and it came from all the Pakistani intelligence agencies, civilian and military, had seen that report. It was a combined intelligence report that Bin Laden was in Pakistan. So my point is, if the Pakistani intelligence know that he's meeting militant leaders and he's in Pakistan, why weren't they hunting for him harder? That really
well,
is
I don't think they wanted to find him necessarily.
The second thing is Libby. Yes, they did a very hard investigation tracking down Libby. He did try and kill Musharraf. At the time, I totally agree with you. They did a very serious investigation. They found Libby, they tracked him, they got him. But Musharraf also writes in his book that they nearly caught Libby in Abbottabad, and he had the use of 3 safe houses in Abbottabad. And they raided the wrong one, and he got away. You know, they raided one, and he was actually in another, and he escaped. And Musharraf writes about that. You know, so now why aren't they checking every house in Abbottabad? That's just when they were building.
Well, this is that this goes to the question of competence.
Don't give me that one.
Well, no, but it's true. It's like, you know, but
yeah, I just don't buy that. And I've got a cabinet minister in my book saying, don't believe our forces, you know, Pakistan state is more competent than anyone else would believe. You know, and there's another minister who says after the Lal Masjid attack or siege, he says to an ISI general, every morning you have on your desk the minutes of who I met the night before and what we talked about. So don't tell me you don't know that there's weapons and militants in Lal Masjid just 100 yards from your headquarters. You know, so the idea of they're incompetent, they're not.
Well, look, all human beings are incompetent. I mean, it's a good
but
general
they're also
explanation.
brilliant. I mean, the ISI are brilliant.
Well, no, I don't accept the idea that they're brilliant. I mean, because if they're brilliant, why would they be doing this strategy that you point out, which is so self-defeating?
Well, but they think they're going to achieve through chaos what they want to achieve, which is dominance of the region. I agree. I think it's a ruinous strategy, but I think they really believe in it.
I guess one final point on the Bin Laden issue. Admiral Mullen's last official act after 27 visits to Pakistan was to testify before a Senate committee and say that the Haqqani network was owned and operated by the ISI. Presumably he has access to all the information that secret information the United States has, right?
Right.
It's kind of strange he didn't take this opportunity to say they also were harboring Bin Laden, since, as you know, that was, it went down pretty badly in Pakistan, that public statement.
Yeah, I think the Haqqani, Mullen was particularly angry about the Haqqani arm because he just had, and I show it in the book, you know, before he made that speech, they just had these devastating attacks in Afghanistan there was a huge truck bomb that went into a base in Wardak. And I mean, it was unbelievable. They didn't kill many people, but they wounded, I think it was 90 plus or 70 plus, I'd have to check.
He was more angry at the Haqqani network than Al-Qaeda?
Well, he just had these two devastating attacks. So there's this truck bomb that injured 70 plus American soldiers. And then they had this attack, one of these, what they call a complex attack, very close to the US Embassy, to the point that the ambassador had to go into a bunker for 24 hours. And the battle raged right in Kabul around the American Embassy, and people going to the consulate got injured by mortars. And they'd taken a sort of high-rise, half-built construction site and rained rockets down on the embassy. So those two, and I think by then, they were tracking Badruddin Haqqani's phone for ages, and so I think they heard him directing the attacks. They knew he's calling from Waziristan. They know he's closely in contact. I mean, they knew Badruddin Haqqani was meeting with ISI officials. So I think Mullen's anger was because the proof was so clear. I think, I don't know what Mullen knows about Obama, but I've had some very senior military people write to me after my story saying, congratulating me and saying you're on the right track. So I think there are some, I don't know what they know, but I don't think just because he didn't address the Obama issue doesn't mean he knows things. I just think he had very, very clear evidence that made him particularly disappointed and angry about the Haqqanis. Because it was directly affecting American lives in Afghanistan, and what kind of ally is that's doing these things?
Right. Well, what kind of ally would harbor the mastermind of 9/11? Because that was obviously when I reported my book, I talked on the record to Admiral Mullen, Mike Leiter, who ran the National Counterterrorism Center, Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, General Cartwright, who was the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Michelle Flournoy, who was Head of Policy at DOD, Mike Vickers, who was in charge of Special Operations, Tony Blinken, who's now the Deputy National Security Advisor, Dennis McDonough, who's now the National Security Advisor, the Chief of Staff. The list goes on. And this was the first question I had. It's like, was Pakistan cognizant of bin Laden being there? And this was a huge debate that they had at the NSC. They had 5 meetings. That all these people, I mean, it's not like some of them are not fans of Pakistan. They all universally said they did not know. Cameron Munter, who was ambassador at the time.
Well, yeah, but
so what
he doesn't know anything. I mean, I would go to his off-the-record briefings, and I would have to tell I knew more than he did. I mean, so some of them I think are sitting in Washington.
You're saying that the head of the
ambassador of Pakistan, I knew more than he did.
No,
that's for sure.
That may well be the case, but I'm asking about. You're saying that you know more than the CIA, the National Counterterrorism Center, CENTCOM, DOD, the NSC, the White House.
Well, I'll say that one senior official who I did try out this special desk on, was amazed because he said we haven't got that, but he said it makes sense. He said you should go with it.
It makes sense, but it feels like for a lot of people that it's something they want to believe, but that's theology.
No, but
that's not evidence.
I think they can't necessarily get it. What Pakistani is going to say to an American reveal that. It came to me differently. It's someone who's cooperating with a long-time Pakistani source. Persuading to let me have it is different to giving it to a CIA official. So I think there is a difference in motivation of telling a Pakistani journalist first, than telling a CIA official.
Okay.
But I think also, let's see. I'm sure it'll come out. I really do believe this. But I do not trust all the officials, because I think. I was horrified to hear that a national security aide in the Bush administration said they used to sit around for ages, and this was 2006, discussing is Pakistan supporting the Taliban or not. And that shocked me so much. Are they still discussing it? When, 2003, 2002, it was clear. I talked to an American ambassador, and I asked about, I was getting these stories from these Taliban who were being forced to go back and fight, or told they would be imprisoned, or even worse. They were threatened to be killed. And I asked an American ambassador, and I was told, oh, I've never heard anything like that. And I thought, are you stupid, or you're not doing your job, or are you lying to me? I mean,
but that's a sort of
there's
straw
a
person
level.
argument.
No, but there's really a level that is serious, and I think sometimes it's lying. Sometimes it's just not wanting to say on record something to a journalist that is just too sensitive. But sometimes I think there's the head in the sand, but actually what I really do want to say, and is again I mention it in the book, we shouldn't spend all our time debating the toss on this. Do you believe it? Do you not? Because actually and I have a diplomat saying, we shouldn't have spent years and years saying, are the Pakistanis supporting the Taliban or not? We should have actually said, this is happening, this is what it looks like on the ground, what is our policy? And I think the same with this. Because I believe Zawahiri is still in Pakistan. I know he is, actually. And I actually had quite a recent, very interesting tip that he was in Baluchistan. And so it's more not who's hiding him and why, but it's more, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's really the main issue that we're looking at.
Okay. If you have a question, raise your hand and identify yourself and wait for the microphone. Where is the microphone? Start with that gentleman there. Tyler.
Good afternoon. It was very stimulating conversation. I was in Pakistan as a journalist as the Soviets were attacking Afghanistan. And even during that time, the Arabs were coming to the soil of Pakistan, and they were getting equipped and going to Kunar and Jalalabad province. And they did lots of atrocities there that I'm an eyewitness to that. However, the bureaucracy from the United States and the bureaucracy of Pakistan didn't want to admit anything which is happening beyond ordinary. At that time, Mr. Oakley was the ambassador of the United States to Pakistan, and all these atrocities were happening in the soil of Afghanistan. At that time, this whole movement of fundamentalism was not that strong. It could be controlled. But nothing happened.
Okay, we're going to have a question because we
Sure.
only have 15 minutes.
But my question is now, it's going beyond the point that's only the threat of Taliban. With the new generation of the military in Pakistan and ISI, do you think there is going to be a nuclear threat by the terrorists from the Pakistani soil towards the entire world?
Doesn't bear thinking. I don't think so. I mean, I still, when you work in Pakistan and you interview the military, there is a great sense of responsibility and a great pride about their nuclear arsenal. It's untouchable. Journalists are not allowed to write about it much, and certainly not allowed to criticize it or look deeply at the proliferation problems under A.Q. Khan. But I do think at the same time there is a responsibility there. And so although I'm very critical of the use of proxy war as a tactic in Afghanistan and Kashmir, I think, and perhaps it's wishful thinking, but I think the Pakistani military has a sense of responsibility on keeping its nuclear arsenal independent and untouched. They don't want interference from foreigners, but I think as the ultimate deterrent, and they will guard that jealously, but I think and I hope sensibly.
This lady here.
Hi, my name is Ann Rutherford, and at the end of Lone Survivor, it was noted that the Pashtun, the Afghani, protected the American because he was a guest. And this was also said of the Taliban that they protected the Al-Qaeda because they were a guest. If we had known more about the people and dealt with them as a people, things would have been different. And do you think that they have figured out more about the Afghans as a people and to help them and to deal with the insurgency?
You mean Al-Qaeda have? Or so who's they have worked out? Oh, you mean the Americans?
Yeah, have Americans.
Have Americans worked out? Well, certainly you can't spend more than a decade in a country and fighting and not learn something. So, of course, what's impressive is that I think the American military has learned a great deal over the both wars, the Iraq and Afghanistan. So they fight better, more cleverly. They did, they worked out the whole revamped the counterinsurgency strategy under Petraeus. And you get a lot of linguists, and then amazingly you see these anthropologists going alongside the soldiers into villages, advising on cultural issues. So there's been a great deal of learning, but at the same time you see how poles apart people are in the handling of Karzai, in also there's an attitude that Afghans can't be trusted, or they all lie, or you can't believe them. I still get that a lot, even when I use Afghan sources, and people seem to think that they're only worth half of what an American source will be. So there's still huge cultural differences and huge lacks, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it as anyone. But I think there has been a learning curve, and I think there has been great trust built. You see it in some levels with the American soldiers and the Afghan army. You see them working together like I've never seen before, which is impressive.
Do you think the BSA will be signed in September?
Yeah, maybe even July.
Okay, that would be great. Yes, gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Mohsin Kamal. I work in a law firm here. My question is from you, madam. You said that Pakistan, they might be protecting, or they knew where Ayman al-Zawahiri is in Pakistan, but I want to ask from you, what do you think Pakistan is thinking by keeping Ayman al-Zawahiri there? What do you think Ayman al-Zawahiri has some kind of bargaining value for anything? Like with the end game in Afghanistan, like Pakistan can negotiate something with US or Afghanistan and Ayman al-Zawahiri on one side, and so on the other side, Pakistan army is battling against Al-Qaeda and Taliban, and they're dying every day. So what sense do you make out of it, if at all?
Yeah, I'm still wondering that. But the two best minds that or sources that I had on this gave their explanations. Ziauddin Butt, who was a former ISI chief, he's accused Musharraf of hiding bin Laden in 2004. And he said he did it to as part of his overall aim that Musharraf had, which was to cooperate with the West, get the financial and the military assistance that he needed, and prevent, he was given this ultimatum originally, you're with us or against us, so he wanted to be with the West, he wanted to cooperate, he did cooperate on arresting some Al-Qaeda people, but he kept bin Laden for a rainy day. In other words, keep the financial assistance coming, we'll cooperate, but we'll keep this guy here, so one day maybe we need to give him up, or we control him at least. So it's sort of protective custody. So that's one theory. The other one that was given to me by a senior CIA American official was he thought that both Kiani and Pasha, because by this time Musharraf was out of the picture, just could never give up bin Laden because he was this symbolic figurehead to the Arab world and to the Muslim world, and that they did not want to be members of a very big, important Muslim nation, to be the ones that betrayed such a man and to give him up to America. So that they just couldn't do that and didn't want to be the people who did that. And that also makes sense. So I think those are two very thoughtful ideas on why they did it. And I think it could be a bit of both.
But these are theories, they're not facts.
Yeah, but they're people even more steeped in it than me as to what the motivations were.
Yeah, I've got two brief questions. I spent 11 months last year in Pakistan, based in Lahore. I was Chief of Party for the Environmental and Social Assessment of Kurramtangi Multi-Purpose Project in North Waziristan. And we did a lot of household surveys, satellite imagery work. My two questions are, why would anyone really think that apart from the Durand Line, the FATA, Federally Administrative Tribal Areas, are anything, functionally part of Pakistan? Because our impression was that they're not. And the other is, do you really think the ISI, military intelligence, and the political parties actually share information? Because our impression was they don't. They're like, for us, they were completely separate entities that they're sort of like symbiotic organisms that don't parasitize or kill each other, but they sort of coexist. Thank you. Well, I'll buy your book, by the way.
Thank you so much. That's very kind.
We've got 7 minutes left, so we're going to
Those are great questions. I think FATA is part of Pakistan in that I think the Durand Line should be recognized eventually by the Afghans to resolve part of this problem. But I agree, it's very cut off. It's lived under a strange code for so long, since the British. And so the British created it as a buffer region, and I think unfortunately it's still like that. And the tragedy is that there's 1 million Pashtuns who've left FATA and who are now camped in the old Afghan refugee camps and in Peshawar because of this reign of terror and this fighting, which is just so horrendous. And I think you're absolutely right on the military and the intelligence being so separate from the politicians. And what's shocking is when you talk to the politicians, how little they understand or know about the Taliban, about everything that's going on, because they're really kept out of it, and parliamentarians are too, which is partly why I wrote the book. I really did want to start a debate inside Pakistan on this, because many Pakistanis are ignorant of what their own military and their own intelligence services are actually doing.
This lady over here. Yeah, Sarah.
Sarah Chase from Carnegie Endowment. I want to try to spin a thread that might go back to the final point you made, Carlotta, about policy. So, Peter, you suggest that a lot of the people you talk to have negative views of Pakistan. When you name them, I'm not sure it actually comes out that way. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is it possible that Carlotta's thesis is so gigantic, it would imply such a gigantic overhaul and re-examination of US policy that there's almost an intellectual blockage against thinking about it, or even against asking some of the questions that Carlotta's asking? And the point that I'll just make as not evidence, but as an indication, is the famous photo, with the whole cabinet and the bin Laden raid. And we all heard that President Obama actually thought through whether how many helicopters ought to be going on this raid. Now, you look at the building and you look at the way it was situated and where it was situated. On the face of it, it looks like a safe house. So my question has been for a while, why was President Obama focusing on the tactical details of how many helicopters ought to go to that thing, rather than saying, golly, if this is what it looks like it is, we have a gigantic rethink of Pakistan policy that we ought to be doing. So I just ask both of you to reflect on that.
Well, he didn't want his presidency to go down because there weren't enough helicopters. I mean, I think it was pretty simple. That's why he was interested in the tactical.
But he could also have tasked a rethink of Pakistan policy. I was there and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right, but if he really believed that they knew, but I just gave you maybe a half a dozen people. I talked to, as you know, Sarah, very well. I talked to many, many more people on the record and some on background. They all, absolutely none of them said we have any evidence to believe that the Pakistanis knew. Now, they could all be wrong, But the problem with that is that would involve a conspiracy of people all over the US government all saying, hey, we don't believe this, or we don't have any evidence. And I don't believe that. The American government is too big, too massive to get its act together in such a way. When conspiracies happen, they come out. We live in an open society. So if there is this information within the national, I have no brief either way. I mean, I'm as interested as you are. But so far, there's no evidence. There is one person who's told Carlotta about this desk. That isn't evidence.
Yeah, but I think your use of evidence is wrong, because this is a secret. This is a covert thing. This is a
Watergate was a
thing.
secret too.
Yeah, but if we were in a court of law, we wouldn't necessarily matter if we don't have the evidence, but we would put all these things together and persuade a jury, and here we all are.
Yeah, but a jury would acquit if there wasn't actual. It was
But they would understand the circumstances. They would understand the overall accumulation.
I
of
don't think we're
evidence.
disagreeing that there is no evidence.
Yeah, anyway. Right, I quite agree with you that Obama should have done a rethink, but he actually didn't he, when he came into office? He spoke so convincingly that this was the right war, that this was the thing we should concentrate. He really, that Woodward book that exposed so much of what they knew about Pakistan and what was going on, meant that, in my view, he did rethink it, or he did look at it in a refreshingly clear way. But what's amazing since the Obama raid, since the Bin Laden raid, was that we've gone back. It seemed to expose everything, but actually we've gone back to this treading on eggshells, as one person mentions it to me in the book. Of not doing anything to rock the relationship, and that above all the relationship with Pakistan should be continued, and therefore engagement and careful handling, and not rock the boat. And that does seem to be a missed opportunity, because in my view that it's this sort of thing that will rock and change things in the end, and isn't that what we're waiting for?
Gentleman over here. Just a small note. Obama has visited dozens of countries. He's made a point of not visiting Pakistan. The idea that we have this great relationship with them that we're trying to preserve doesn't make it.
No, but what I mean is the security, the CIA-ISI relationship. That's what's the concern, is to hold that together. And I think those guys and the diplomats around them are being listened to and are driving it.
I'm Ahmed Majidir, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. My question is related to what Sarah said. Yes, perhaps there is no solid evidence about Pakistan's complicity in hiding bin Laden, but there has been enough evidence about supporting other terrorist groups like the Haqqani Network, which has killed more American soldiers in Afghanistan than Al-Qaeda has. So why has that not brought any major change in US policy over the past 13 years?
Yes.
And second question that I have is completely a separate one. When we talk about the issue of extremism or terrorism emanating from Pakistan, we usually just confine that discussion to Waziristan. For good reason. There are a lot of different dangerous terrorist groups there. But if you see the population of the 7 tribal agencies, perhaps it's 4 to 5 million, making 2 to 3% of the country's population. We usually don't talk about just other growing trends of radicalization and extremism in more populous places like Punjab and Karachi. So do you see that are these trends really happening? Do you see a more dangerous threat on the rising, emanating from Pakistan, facing the Western national security interests? Thank you.
Yes, very good question, and I do come to it in the last chapter of the book. I am actually extremely worried about that, because when you live in Pakistan and you know people, you hear all these stories of the radicalization in Punjab. People like Saifullah Akhtar, this really notorious character who's been very close to the ISI all his life. He's building another big madrasa in southern Punjab. He's still free. He was behind the huge bombing that nearly killed Benazir when she first came back in Karachi. I mean, why are these guys still allowed to carry on? And he's now indoctrinating and encouraging more Punjabi villagers. And the latest story that Kathy Gatton wrote in Punjab, she's a veteran reporter there, is that they're all talking about the next great offensive is in Afghanistan post 2014. They're all gearing up for that. You hear of they're moving into Sindh, which is just unheard of in 5-10 years ago. So yes, it's very worrying because it's a huge country and a country I love, Pakistan, and it's very, very worrying that this is continuing unchecked. And we're back to the policy thing that you can't walk away from Afghanistan. You pull out the troops this year maybe, but if you walk away, this juggernaut is continuing and it's not stopping. How many thousands of Pakistanis have gone to fight in Syria, and they've taken the polio virus with them. I mean, it's really it's a very alarming, and I'm very worried for Afghanistan, but I'm very worried for Pakistan because you can't just turn off the tap. It's got to be a massive policy change in all those countries.
We have run out of time, and presumably people want to buy your book and have it signed by you. I know you've got a tight schedule.
Nice. Thank you.
And we have a lot more questions, but that's because there's so many good questions to ask. So thank you.
Thank you very much.